She lost the love of her life before her first child ever saw the light of day. Alone, heartbroken, and deserted by hope. But when someone she never expected became her quiet strength, her world began to shift forever. This is a story of love, loss, and the courage to begin again. The soft melody of a piano floated through the grand living room of the Henderson mansion, curling around Evelyn Henderson like a tender embrace. Her fingers brushed across the gentle curve of her belly. 3 months pregnant and glowing with calm joy. Outside, the Atlanta skyline shimmered, a tapestry of gold and silver lights against the dark sky. Her husband, Nathan Henderson, was due home any minute. A billionaire philanthropist, a man who had built his empire from the ground up, yet still looked at her every morning as though she was his proudest achievement. Evelyn smiled faintly, remembering his words before he left for the charity gala that evening. "I won't be late, sweetheart. Keep that smile for me." But the night stretched endlessly. Rain began to patter against the windows, and the clock ticked past midnight. Her calls went unanswered. A quiet unease started to bloom in her chest, subtle at first, then sharp and cold. When the phone finally rang, it wasn't Nathan. It was his assistant. His voice trembled. "Mrs. Henderson, there's been an accident." The streets of Atlanta glistened with rain as Evelyn raced to the hospital. The air reeked of antiseptic, the fluorescent lights humming above her, voices blending into a blur of panic and sorrow. Her heart thundered as she demanded to see him. But the doctor's face told her everything before words could. "I'm sorry, Mrs. Henderson." He didn't make it. Something inside her broke. The world fell silent. Just a roar of white noise pressing on her chest until she couldn't breathe. Her knees gave way, but someone caught her before she fell. A pair of strong, calloused hands. It was Lucas, Nathan's driver. He said nothing. He didn't need to. His eyes mirrored her pain, her disbelief. Lucas had served the Hendersons for years, loyal, quiet, always in the background. But that night, he stayed. Days slipped into weeks. The once lively mansion became a hollow shell. Curtains drawn, meals untouched, laughter erased. The sound of Nathan's voice haunted every hallway. Evelyn locked herself away, trapped inside memories that sliced like glass. The warmth of his hand on her cheek, his laughter, the nursery they'd planned together. "We'll paint it yellow," he had said. "Something bright, something full of life." Now even the thought made her shiver. She stopped answering calls, stopped seeing friends, family, even her doctor. The only person who refused to leave was Lucas. Every morning his car would appear in the driveway. He'd bring groceries, or flowers from the garden, or a meal he'd leave quietly at her door. He fixed what had fallen apart, the dripping tap, the flickering light, the dying roses in the backyard. He never asked for anything. He never preached. He just stayed. One grey afternoon, rain pouring down the windows, Evelyn heard his voice from the hallway. "Mrs. Henderson, you should eat something." She didn't answer. "You don't have to talk," he added softly. "Just eat. For the baby." Nathan would want that. The sound of that name broke something inside her, but it also made her open her eyes. She looked at the untouched bowl of soup he'd left. The steam was gone, but a flicker of something alive, stirred faintly within her. Ghosts of memory. The next morning, Evelyn forced herself to stand by the window. The Georgia sun was cruelly bright. The roses Lucas had planted were blooming again, red, defiant, alive. She watched him from a distance as he polished Nathan's car. The way he moved, steady, respectful, precise, reminded her of a man who carried quiet strength rather than charm. Lucas was different from Nathan. Where Nathan commanded attention, Lucas drew it gently. He caught her gaze and gave a small nod. Not a smile, not a question, just silent acknowledgement. For the first time in weeks, she didn't turn away. That evening she walked into Nathan's study. Everything was exactly as he'd left it. Papers neatly stacked, his favorite fountain pen resting beside a half-written note. She touched his chair, her voice trembling. "You promised you'd never leave me." Tears blurred her vision as she sank to the floor, sobbing until her throat burned. That's how Lucas found her, crumpled, trembling. He didn't speak. He knelt beside her, his silence calm and solid. After a long moment she whispered, "Why are you still here?" "Because someone needs to be," he said quietly. It wasn't pity. It was conviction. In the days that followed, Evelyn began to see him more often, sometimes fixing the porch light, sometimes trimming the roses, sometimes just sitting in his car, reading while waiting. It was his quiet rhythm that began to fill the hollow spaces inside her. Once, when she nearly stumbled on the stairs, Lucas caught her just in time. Their eyes met. For a brief moment, she saw not a driver, but a man with a heart heavy with empathy. "You shouldn't be walking around without eating," he said, half teasing. She let out a dry, startled laugh. It shocked her. She hadn't heard her own laughter since the funeral. That night, she sat by the window and finally tasted the soup he'd left. It was cold and too salty, but it tasted like the first step toward survival. A faint light. The morning light streamed through the tall windows of the Henderson mansion, spilling warmth over the marble floors that had long known only silence. The once suffocating stillness had softened. Somewhere deep inside, Evelyn could feel it, a faint shift, like a closed bud beginning to open after a long winter. She was still grieving, yes, but something inside her refused to die completely. Each day, Lucas arrived at dawn. He never asked to come in, but his quiet presence lingered like the smell of fresh rain. Sometimes she'd find her mail already sorted, her groceries neatly stacked, the front porch swept clean. It wasn't just what he did. It was how he did it. Thoughtfully, gently, without expectation. One afternoon she found him in the garden, pruning the roses Nathan had once planted. The air was thick with the scent of wet earth and flowers. "You don't have to keep doing this," she said softly from behind him. He turned, wiping sweat from his forehead. "I know," he replied simply, "but I want to." Their eyes met, and for the first time, she didn't look away. Something wordless passed between them, a fragile understanding, built not on desire, but on pain shared in silence. As the weeks passed, Evelyn began venturing out again. Short walks, quiet moments at the park. She'd sit on the same bench every morning, watching families play, lovers laugh, and life move on as if the universe hadn't once shattered. Lucas sometimes drove her there. They rarely spoke on the way. Their silence was strangely comforting. One day, as the car hummed down Peachtree Street, she said, "You don't talk much." He smiled faintly. "Talking isn't always what people need." She turned to the window, hiding a soft smile of her own. "You're right," she murmured. At home that evening, she walked into the nursery, the one she hadn't entered since Nathan's passing. The soft yellow paint still glowed faintly in the fading light. Tiny baby clothes hung untouched in the wardrobe, and the air smelled faintly of lavender. Her fingers trailed over the crib. "He wanted this color," she whispered, tears slipping silently down her cheeks. Lucas appeared at the doorway but didn't step inside. "It's beautiful," he said quietly. She nodded, brushing a tear away. He never got to see it finished. Maybe he sees it now. Lucas replied. Something in his voice, gentle, certain, anchored her. She met his gaze, and for the first time in months, the air between them felt warm again. Not everyone understood the quiet companionship forming between them. When Evelyn's sister visited from Charleston, she frowned upon seeing Lucas helping Evelyn carry groceries inside. "Evelyn," she said later that evening, her voice sharp with worry, "you can't keep depending on your driver for everything." "People will talk." Evelyn set her teacup down, her expression calm but tired. "People already talk, Claire." "Let them." Her sister sighed. "I just don't want you to get hurt again." But Evelyn wasn't foolish. She knew what the world might say. She also knew that Lucas had never once crossed a boundary. He was steady, respectful, present. When Claire left the next morning, Lucas noticed the storm cloud in Evelyn's eyes. "She's worried," he said simply. "I know," Evelyn replied, "but she doesn't understand. You were there when no one else was." He looked away. "You would have found your strength with or without me." "Maybe," she said softly, "but it's easier to find when someone believes you still have it." For a moment, silence stretched between them, heavy with things neither dared to say. Months later, on a crisp October morning, Evelyn stood before the mirror, fastening a small pendant around her neck. It was the first time in almost a year that she had dressed up for anything other than a doctor's visit. Lucas was waiting by the car, glancing at his watch as she stepped out in a light blue dress. "You look different," he said after a moment. She smiled, almost shyly. "Good different?" "Beautiful different," he said before he could stop himself. Their eyes met, and for the briefest second, both hearts skipped a beat. The drive to the charity gala was filled with music, the same event Nathan had attended the night he died. Evelyn's hands trembled slightly on her lap, but Lucas noticed and reached out, his fingers brushing hers for just a second. "You're not alone," he said quietly. And she believed him. At the gala, people stared. Whispers swirled like dust, the widow of Nathan Henderson finally seen again. Some eyes were kind, others cruel. Evelyn held her head high. Later, when she returned to the car, her eyes were bright with tears. "It felt strange being there," she confessed. "But I didn't break." Lucas looked at her for a long moment. "You're stronger than you think." Her laughter filled the car, soft, honest, alive. The sound startled even her. "Thank you," she whispered. "For what?" "For reminding me I'm still here." Winter came to Atlanta, draping the city in grey skies and slow, cold rain. Evelyn's baby was due soon. Lucas was still there, more as a friend now than a driver. One evening, a storm raged outside. Evelyn doubled over, clutching her stomach. The pain was sudden, sharp, terrifying. She called out. But no one was there except Lucas, who had just arrived with dinner. He rushed to her side, lifting her gently into his arms. "It's okay, I've got you," he whispered as he carried her through the rain to the car. Hours later, under harsh hospital lights, Evelyn brought a baby boy into the world. Her tears fell freely as the nurse placed the tiny, crying child in her arms. Lucas stood nearby, his eyes wet. Evelyn looked up at him and smiled weakly. "His name," she said softly, "will be Nathaniel, after his father." Lucas swallowed hard. "He'd be proud." "So am I," she whispered. That night, when everyone had left, and the baby slept peacefully beside her, Evelyn looked out through the hospital window at the quiet Atlanta skyline. She thought of Nathan, of promises left unfinished, and then she thought of Lucas, of the man who had stood beside her through every storm. For the first time, she didn't feel haunted. She felt grateful. Life hadn't given her what she expected, but it had given her someone who reminded her how to live again. And though she didn't know it yet, The next chapter of her story was only just beginning. The first cries of baby Nathaniel echoed softly through the Henderson home, a home that no longer felt like a tomb. Evelyn would often stand by the nursery window at dawn, the warm Georgia light spilling across her face as she rocked her son to sleep. He had Nathan's eyes, deep and calm, but his smile was entirely her own. The quiet mornings became her new sanctuary. She no longer wept when she heard the wind brush against the house or when she passed Nathan's study. The pain was still there. It always would be. But it no longer consumed her. And through it all, Lucas remained. A gentle rhythm. He became more than just a helping hand. He became part of their daily rhythm. He'd fix the fence, run errands, hold Nathaniel when Evelyn needed rest. She'd laugh sometimes and tell him, "You do everything except wear a cape." To which he'd reply with a shy grin, "Not sure I'd look good in one." Their friendship deepened, natural, effortless, unspoken. There was a peace in their connection, something that didn't demand but simply was. One quiet evening, Evelyn invited him to dinner, not as an employer, but as a friend. The table was simple: pasta, a bottle of red wine, baby Nathaniel sleeping soundly nearby. They talked about music, about childhood dreams, about the kind of happiness that grows from small things. At one point, Evelyn laughed so hard she had to wipe her tears. "I haven't laughed like this in years," she said softly. Lucas's gaze lingered on her, gentle and unreadable. "Then I guess tonight's a good night." The silence that followed wasn't awkward. It was warm, full, alive. For the first time, Evelyn realized that her heart wasn't broken anymore. It had simply been waiting to heal. A world watching. As months passed, whispers began again. "Have you heard? The widow of Nathan Henderson is seeing her driver. The tabloids caught wind of it. Cameras outside her gate. Journalists hungry for scandal." When Evelyn read the first article, her chest tightened. It wasn't anger she felt. It was fear. Not for her, but for Nathaniel. That afternoon, she found Lucas loading groceries into the kitchen. "They're talking again," she said quietly. "I know. Maybe it's best you stay away for a while." He looked at her for a long moment. "If that's what you want, I'll go." Her throat tightened. "It's not what I want," she whispered. "It's what they'll make of it." Lucas nodded, his jaw tense. "You've survived worse than gossip, Evelyn." But she shook her head. "I just need time." "Please." He didn't argue. He simply left, quietly, respectfully, the way he always had. That night, the house felt unbearably empty again. The clock ticked louder. The silence pressed heavier. Nathaniel stirred in his crib, and Evelyn felt the weight of everything she'd tried to keep hidden crash down once more. She missed him, more than she expected. Weeks passed. Lucas didn't call, didn't write. He'd left Atlanta entirely, she later learned, to work for another family in Savannah. Life continued. Nathaniel began crawling, then laughing, his joy filling the mansion with a warmth that dulled the ache, but never erased it. Every now and then, Evelyn caught herself glancing at the driveway, half expecting to see his familiar car parked there. But it never was. One morning, she found an envelope in the mail. No name, just her address written in simple, steady handwriting. Inside was a note. "I promised to stay until you could stand again." "You can now. I'll always be grateful for the days I got to see you smile again." Her hands trembled. She pressed the note to her chest and wept, not from sorrow, but from something bittersweet. Gratitude, love, loss, all tangled into one. 2 years later. Evelyn stood backstage at a charity event in downtown Atlanta, the first she'd hosted since Nathan's passing. She looked radiant, poised, every inch the woman the city once admired. As she stepped onto the stage, applause filled the hall. But as she began to speak, her voice trembled with sincerity. "Life doesn't always give us what we plan for," she said, her gaze sweeping across the crowd. "Sometimes it takes everything from us before teaching us what truly matters. But love doesn't die. It changes form. It finds new ways to live after the event." As the hall emptied, she walked outside into the warm night air. The city lights shimmered like stars fallen close enough to touch. And there, standing near his car, was Lucas. Time had added a few lines to his face, but his eyes were the same. Steady, kind, certain. She froze for a heartbeat, then smiled, tears welling instantly. "You came back. I heard you were speaking tonight," he said softly. "Couldn't stay away." They stood there for a long moment, the noise of the city fading into silence around them. Evelyn took a step closer. "I missed you," she whispered. "I missed you too." For the first time, she didn't hold back. She reached for his hand. He took it without hesitation. No promises, no declarations. Just the quiet understanding of two souls who had walked through fire and found each other in the ashes. Months later, on a calm Sunday morning, Evelyn sat on the porch with Nathaniel playing at her feet and Lucas reading beside her. The scent of roses drifted through the garden, the same roses Nathan had planted, now tended by Lucas's hands. Life had come full circle. She looked at her son, then at Lucas, then up at the open blue sky. Nathan would always have a place in her heart. That was something no one could ever replace. But love had returned in another form. Quiet, steady, healing. Evelyn smiled. Not the fragile smile of someone pretending to be fine, but the sure smile of someone who had truly survived. And as the wind whispered through the garden, she finally understood. You never stop loving those you've lost. You just learn to love again, differently, bravely, beautifully. Thanks for watching. Comment where you are watching from so we can give you a special shout-out. If you enjoyed the story, please subscribe to Boundless Echoes for more interesting stories. We deeply appreciate your support. Please don't forget to also like, share, and comment. See you in the next video.